Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 53 of the Core Dev Saga. I'm your host, Hudson. I'm really tired today. Um, what are we talking about first? Oh, wait, let me see if everyone can hear me. Yeah, they can. Um, let's talk about the Constantinople postponement. That was a lot of fun, right, everyone?
Yay.
Yeah, Hudson, I think you're not the only one who's tired. I think there were some engineers that pulled some all-nighters to make it possible. So I think we should, first of all, just express gratitude to all those people.
I agree. Thanks, everyone who chipped in to um, help with the postponement, the people who were involved in the decision, and then everybody who reached out to all the exchanges and miners and major stakeholders to help delay the fork. Um, so the first part of it is the difficulty bomb update, and someone told me that the next time the difficulty bomb is going to update, because it's already gone off, is block 7,100,000. So I'll paste that in there in the chat.
Yeah, Hudson, I can jump in on this one quickly.
Oh,
So
great.
just as a recap, I think we spoke about this back in like November. I did some analysis of this using a script that Vitalik wrote for the previous one and had the help of 3 or 4 other awesome people. And the short version of the story is the difficulty bomb has already started to tick, right? So I believe if you look at the block times, we've had like one visible tick up so far above the current difficulty level. We were originally predicting block times to reach 30 seconds in May. So I guess 2 important points to make. The first is that since that point, the hash power has declined by around 20%, which means I think it will happen. We would hit 30-second block times closer to the end of April. And the second point to make, we just need to keep reiterating this, is that while it took 6 months or whatever for that to happen in 2017, it's going to happen faster this time because we're at an overall much higher network hash power than we were last time. So we still have a few months, but it's ticking.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Lane. Anyone have any comments on that? Or we're going to get to the part where we talk about when the next hard fork should be, so we can even wait for then. Okay, so the next part is, I think everyone by now knows kind of the story about why the reason the fork was delayed. So we've been talking about how to mitigate or whether or not to even include the EIP in the redo hard fork. So that let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit. We had a report from Trail of Bits and Chain Security on some potential mitigation efforts. There's also a talk page on Eth Magicians that has some ideas, and there's some recommendations there. And then I know Martin has been talking a little bit about it, so is Nick. So let's see, is Nick online? I probably doubt it. I think it's really late where he is.
Yeah, it's 2 a.m. for him. He said he would not make it today. Yeah.
Okay. If we want, actually, could Chain Security kind of give like just a real quick overview of what their recommendation is, or just an overview of what they found? If you're talking, you're on mute. Chain Security. I think it'd be the Chain
Just
Security. Or
unmuted.
oh, there you go.
Let me quickly
Oh,
get to
you're
my
unmuted. You're good.
items. So, quick recap. What was found is that the gas changes discussed, especially in one of the EIPs, can have an impact on previously re-entrancy safe smart contracts. And during the search for those, we, together with Trail of Bits and some others in the community, discovered multiple cases, most or all of them not holding significant value, luckily, but still deployed smart contracts which would have been attackable with re-entrancy attacks after the EIP change. So that does as a very quick recap. And I think for the recommendations, is someone here from Trail of Bits?
Okay, yeah, can you hear me?
Jocelyn, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
not
it's probably, I would happily let you talk through them because you compiled those.
Yeah, so there is currently 6 propositions in the Empire, in the A2 Amazation forum, and we started to review them as fast as we could. The first solution we recommend is to simply drop the EIP, the 1283 EIP. Otherwise, there is one proposition which is called the proposition 5 or the proposition 7, according how you want to call it, which is, in our opinion, a bit better than the other one. I don't know if how many people already read the proposal and the recommendation, or if I should go over each of them.
You don't have to go over each and every one, I don't think, but if you want to go over the one that you all landed on as the best potential one, and then if anyone else in the room wants to go over their potential recommendations as well, because I know we have some people who came up with some in the room, so if you want to go over the most recommended.
Yeah, sure. So the solution is simply to kind of keep the original gas cost that is already implemented, but implement the IP using the refund system. So the execution will have exactly the same cost, but it will be cheaper to use through the refund mechanism.
Can you, which of the proposals numbers was it?
So originally it was proposal 5. There were one thing which was not clear in the proposal 5 in terms of kind of full in-depth proposition. So the proposal 5 proposal was to increase the cost of writing to dirty slot to 5,000 gas and to give back as refund 4,800 gas. So it was not clear if this should be for all the dirty storage. That's why in the report we kind of create a slight version of this proposal where instead of changing the gas cost to 5,000, we recommend to just use the gas cost that was pre-EIP. You keep the same cost computation, but you change the refund mechanism of the storage in case of dirty storage. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I'm going ahead and I'm pasting some links to relevant Magicians threads on this so people can take a look. And by the way, from Chain Security speaking, want to make sure that you guys get to introduce yourself if you'd like.
Sure. So this is Matthias. Been working together with Hubert on the Medium post. And I'm running here the operational side of the business.
Wonderful. And then Jocelyn, you're from, I hope I'm saying your name right, you're from Trail of Bits?
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Okay, who has some comments or questions or anything about what was just said?
I have a question. Sorry, Martin, go ahead first.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I'll make it brief. I think it's probably going to be a very long discussion if we go into details about all of these. And my preferred approach is to exclude the EAP from the nearest hard fork, let's call it Constantinople. So I would propose that if we have a champion who wants to speak about a particular proposition, then we could do that. But otherwise, I'd prefer to say we don't decide which one is the best and how exactly to implement it, but just exclude it. That's my opinion.
Just as a thought experiment, even if we decided on updating it today, would the amount of testing and reconfiguration of the fork, along with code changes, be reasonable in the context of getting this out for the difficulty bump?
if we make any kind of modifications to it, that will add a lot of test complexity, in my opinion.
Right.
If we simply drop it, that's a lot less testing required and easier to generate.
In the emergency call the other day, we at least had tentative consensus during that call that the reasonable approach was to kick it down the curb. So that's still my vote.
Yeah, it's a good idea for us to talk about whether or not we're including it rather than what the right decision is. You guys are right. That'll waste some time. So, who else had a comment? I think Alexi maybe.
Yeah. So first of all, I do agree that the simplest way to proceed right now is to just exclude it. And I just very short. I know that Martin suggested not to go into details, but about the 7, whatever the proposal number 7, what I wanted to clarify is that this will somehow reduce the desired effect of the CIP because of the cap which we know exists for the refunds. So just to make it sort of known that it's not the exact replication of the semantics, it's actually slightly less, makes it less powerful, the change.
Anybody else have comments?
Yes. So I was wondering regarding the comments made on the number 1 proposal. So I don't really see how it breaks anything that we desire to have. I mean, it preserves the original intention of the EAP with including all of its benefits. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't break any scenario that's likely to be real world. So could you elaborate on that, please?
You're talking about the proposal number 1 now, which is add a condition to Astro that causes it to revert if less than 2,300 gas remains.
Yes, because I mean, if the gas left is below number, it's then before the EAP, it would cause a revert anyway. It would cause a revert anyway, so it doesn't change that behavior. And when you do have enough gas, you do get the benefit. And this way, you don't have to deal with complexities like the refund limit. So it's essentially a one-liner fix. So I'm trying to understand, why do we need anything more complex than that?
No, it's just that I think people are thinking about what kinds of options exist. I mean, it's not a totally straightforward decision, because adding this particular condition is, it's kind of a weird condition, to be honest. I mean, it is kind of an elegant proposal, I agree, but it's just there's a lot of things that, a lot of other things that could be done. And I think what everyone kind of wants is to reach a conclusion where the proposal that's accepted isn't, super ugly or something.
When we investigated this, we also found that several smart contracts out there have higher gas limits they pass on to other calls. It also depends on which version of the Sol-C compiler was used at a certain time. So those existing contracts might still be attackable. And in addition, it would obviously enshrine into the formal semantics of Ethereum certain workarounds which just happened because of the way people used for some time, let's say in 5 years, the code or Solidity at that time, which adds of course depth in the future when people ask why does this yellow paper version 5 have this case of if less than 2,300 gas do that, which is technical debt we would have to carry along.
Yeah, that's I mean, keeping a log of the reasons behind such decisions is essential anyway, because I mean, maybe if we had that, then maybe the whole problem could have been prevented. It's I mean, if we remembered exactly why we had the limits in the first place. So we should keep this regardless of whether we take this solution or that solution. But if we change the gas limit, we need to also think carefully, not the gas limit, the refund limit. We need to think carefully about the reasons why we chose to limit it in the first place, and that's and my sense is that this is more complicated. You know, understanding how it affects miners and everything.
I would say that in order to answer your question, Yoav, is that if we make a thought experiment and move ourselves to a situation prior to, so let's say that we are currently deciding whether to include this EIP or not back, let's say, a couple of months ago, and somebody comes, and then we knew about this vulnerability, and one of the proposals was to add this check about 2,300. So would have we actually accepted it back then with this particular workaround? Probably no. So that's, I think, enough reason to not do it right now, because we're kind of in a similar situation now. We don't have to rescue the main chain from this. So we basically, by not doing the Constantinople, we brought ourselves back into the situation we want to be, where we can have this freedom of making messy change or not making a messy change. So that's my opinion on that.
Agreed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I want to second what Danny said before. I think the right question to ask right now, like I think we could debate forever how to fix the issue, but I think the real question is how to move forward with Constantinople, and should we, move forward with it without the EIP in question? I'm curious to ask if anyone is strongly opposed to moving forward without that EIP. That might be a good use of time.
Yeah. Let's get consensus on that.
So I can go first. So basically, I think that it is kind of a useful EIP, and I think that if we keep the discussion time boxed, it might actually be beneficial to think about what can we do. How can we change this? How can we change this EIP so it can still be included? So I'm kind of strongly opposed to like moving forward without it, because I feel like taking this EIP away is going to make Constantinople even less event. It's just it's going to be even less of an overall improvement.
Why is that a problem though? Like I'm personally all for like really boring hard forks.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that hard forks don't happen every week, so there aren't like so many chances to include protocol changes. I mean, when's the next one going to be? Like half a year from now?
So that's a good question, and maybe we can't answer the first question without discussing the second one. I think Afri could probably speak to that, but he tentatively proposed something like October, which is not that far away.
Yeah, maybe you're right. But in any case, so I mean, if people feel like I feel like if people can come up with a solid with a solid fix to this particular EIP within, let's say, 2 weeks, and it's pretty clear to everyone that this is a good fix, then it might still be possible to include it.
I would say it's not, because if we change this EIP, we have to change the implementations, we have to adjust our tests. We might want to test this on testnet first. This is nothing I think we can do within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree about that totally. I mean, if a modified implementation, basically, then we're looking at months of time for testing and various forms. Dropping it, we can do that quickly. Moving forward with it as it is, we could do that quickly as well. If the analysis had shown that, we're 99% certain that no contract is affected. Unfortunately, we're not there.
Would a scenario be realistic where the EIP is not included, the hard fork is made within a few weeks, and then roughly like 3 months after that, so like early summer, well, before summer, a properly designed version of the EIP is launched? Because the only option mentioned so far was that the potential next hard fork could be in October.
I think if we postpone this, I mean, if we take Netastor out of the Constantinople fork and want to add it back at some later point, then it has to wait until the next hard fork. So I'm
Yes.
kind of opposed to doing emergency hard forks just to get this feature back in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what we are doing now is going to like a fixed hard fork schedule. This means we have like at least 2 hard forks a year scheduled. I mean, this is like 2 more hard forks than we had last year. So what's wrong with waiting another half a year just to get in this proposal? I don't see why we should have hard forks every 3 months. This is like a huge overhead for the client developers, and yeah.
I mean, October is not half a year from now.
No,
Oh, yeah, but that's kind of what we debated for quite a few times already, that kind of 9 months is more or less a reasonable amount of time to get features in and to properly test it. So by wanting to do a hard fork 3 months from now, we're essentially breaking everything that we talked about until now.
For those perhaps not who haven't been in that a lot, can you quickly say what kind of timelines you are looking at for hard forks? Like how many months before a hard fork or network upgrade do we need to agree on all EIPs to include? How long would be the review time, the test phase, and so on?
Offrey had some kind of scheduled timeline for that stuff, I believe.
Yeah, I'm working out this right now, and what I was proposing, let me just quickly open this. Before we discussed ProgPoW and before we had this Constantinople incident, I was proposing a timeline for subsequent hard forks. So what I was saying is, after a hard fork like Constantinople, I want to schedule a subsequent hard fork like 9 months after this. This means we have like another 3 or 5 months, 3 to 4 or 5 months to discuss proposals that should be included. The deadline is around 5 months before the hard fork. Then client teams have 1 to 2 months to implement it, and then we have a testnet hard fork around 2 months before the mainnet scheduled hard fork.
Understood. Thank you. So it might be interesting to add an additional, like a specific time, perhaps in parallel to the implementation, but ideally after the implementation in the clients to test this more from the, like, let's really try to break this perspective than just from the let's see if Robston doesn't diverge perspective.
Yeah, there's a whole other conversation on what to do about future hard fork and EIP inclusions and what security measures to take. And I know Martin's been looking at that a little bit from a, I guess, auditability perspective.
Totally understood. I'm just asking because of the timeline implications.
No. What I'm suggesting are like deadlines. So we're saying we cannot have the testnet hard fork in less than 2 months before the mainnet hard fork, because we need at least 2 months, 2 weeks is a stable testnet, and then we need another 6 weeks for like releases to be pushed to the users. This is like the deadlines I'm proposing. I'm not saying that there cannot happen anything in parallel.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
So Felix, has your opinion shifted anyway from what we just kind of described as far as potential deadlines go and how long the next planned hard fork would be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'm just way less way less professional than all of you guys when it comes to making changes. So I feel like, certainly there's I mean, if if you guys feel that there's it's best to be very conservative and wait for a very long time, then it's fine. I mean, it's just going to be safer this way.
Okay, sounds good. Is there anyone else who's, or is there anyone at this point who is very opposed to, what's the phrase? Man, I'm just way too tired to be doing this today. to waiting for to taking out the EIP and having a hard fork in like 2 to 6 weeks.
You mean?
Yeah. And actually, we need to figure out if that's the case, how long until the next hard fork, whatever we call it, Constantinople V2 or something. Offrey, had you looked at that? I thought I saw something written by you.
How much time we need to prepare another hard fork without this EIP, or
Yeah,
what was the
correct.
question?
That was the question.
I would say 6 weeks is optimal because we have time to properly push releases for the clients and do like some testing in parallel. But would be nice to hear some opinions from the testing teams.
Peter also had an interesting proposal about sort of how to like what to call this hard fork relative to the others and how to kind of update mainnet relative to the test nets and stuff. So that might be worth also bringing up.
If it helps the decision, this is Ben from the Truffle team. We're pretty close to having a variant of Ganache that has the EAP removed for testing purposes.
Yeah, I'm curious if Dimitri is on the call, how long it would take to modify and then regenerate the tests.
I'm here. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Now I can hear.
Oh, okay. So if we're removing this EIP, all we need to do is just to regenerate the tests to make sure that no clients perform operations the same way they do it if this EIP was not removed. The client do not include this change, regenerate the test, and then see that all of the other clients also behaving like the disabled alert client.
So are we talking about like a couple of days, or what do you think? I mean, to generate.
Yeah, I think it will take about a couple of days. But well, to make sure that every client is updated, I think 1 week.
Yeah, but so a couple of days to generate the tests, and then all client developers can use those tests to verify their own clients.
Yeah.
And after that, there will be Hive tests done doing it black box. But yeah, that's the general outline.
I would like to propose an alternative to this whole rollout. So as far as I understood, this would be kind of redefining what Constantinople is, meaning that we just remove that EIP from Constantinople, regenerate and retest everything as if it didn't exist, and go ahead and remove it from the clients. The only problem with this, and in my opinion, it is a huge problem, is that Robson forked over and enabled this feature 5 months ago. Rinkeby enabled it, give or take, 1 week ago. I'm unsure about whether other private networks or other private proof of authority chains enabled it. The problem here is that if we decide that Constantinople doesn't contain this and we just wipe it out of the clients, then it means that we are going to break every network out there that already had this feature enabled. And while I'm not sure whether, so basically we're telling developers that, hey, we're going to roll back 5 months of blocks worth on Ropsten. So we might as well kill Ropsten because it's useless at that point. And the same goes for Rinkeby, that it's rolling back potentially weeks worth of transactions just to undo. This seems like a really bad idea for me, if we can fix it in a more elegant way. And my proposal was that instead of removing this from Constantinople and wiping it, we can define, so to say, a second hard fork, which only removes this code. So essentially, every client would have at least clients that have test network capabilities would also, so basically would they would leave Constantinople as it is now, just fork it and implement the net store changes, and then have the second, I don't know, Constantinople 2 fork, which disables this code path. And essentially on mainnet, we would, Constantinople 1 and Constantinople 2 would trigger at the same block. And the effect of this would be that we could upgrade every private network, every test network could cleanly upgrade and cleanly disable this EIP without having to roll back any blocks. And also testing wise, then we don't need to regenerate any tests. We just need to add a few more new tests which verify that after Constantinople 2, there aren't any, it's not enabled anymore.
It's a smart suggestion.
And then I would add to this that later on, when we reset all the test nets after a while, maybe, then we can just simply remove that code, right?
No, because you need to be able to reprocess the time in between. But
Yeah, no, but what I mean is that it would only apply for the test net. So if we at some point in time reset all the test net because they become too big, then that would mean that we can just remove that code for the net store changes.
Well, we still would need to probably reach out to the community to make sure nobody's private network gets broken. Because I don't know, we have the PoA networks and XDAI and other networks. I don't know whether they enabled Constantinople or not. So we kind of need to be a bit more careful.
Yeah. So XDAI enabled it. The PoA so-called testnet enabled it. They managed to pull off the hard fork on the mainnet for PoA network. And also the Coven testnet is affected.
So if we decide to go with Peter's suggestion, Dmitry, do you have an idea how that would affect the test process?
Yeah, just to make it clear, is he suggesting to make two separate fork blocks?
No,
fork block numbers
on the same block number.
So my suggestion is that we define two hard forks. One of them is Constantinople as it is currently. And the second one is Constantinople fix-up that just disables this feature. And on mainnet, these two forks would trigger on the same block. On all the test networks, these could be scheduled after we actually release the new.
And what is the difference then? If it's happening on one block, then it's
on
like
mainnet,
it's just one hard fork.
On mainnet, there's absolutely no difference. The problem is that if we just remove it from Constantinople, then we instantly killed every single testnet and every single private network that upgraded already to Constantinople. And by having two forks, those who already upgraded, they can do a second fork to actually downgrade, so to say.
Yeah, so it could save some time for actual preparing of the fork, because then we can get the Ropsten live quicker for this change, right?
So as I understand, test will look exactly the same, like Constantinople hard fork, and the test having EIP disabled. It's just internal client implementation.
Yeah.
No,
I would say you're right.
On this, we had some feedback from clients who are actually using Ropsten in a semi-productive manner already for applications where they aren't required that much of security. And then, so I would be very careful with nuking Ropsten and not underestimate the time actually needed to then start verifying if everything works again, based off of an empty test network.
So from Parity's perspective, Peter's suggestion makes perfect sense. And we should have this Constantinople fix hard fork transition at some point. So we can also fix the PoA networks and Coven. So I would say I favor this approach.
So the issue here is that it doesn't matter how we go forward with mainnet. If we want to keep Rinkaby, Ropsten, and the other networks alive, then Parity and Geth needs to implement a second hard fork anyway. So if we're going to implement it anyway, it would be nicer to make it clean and not hack it in.
So if Constantinople fixed block number is exactly the same as Constantinople hard fork number, then for mainnet, it doesn't make any difference. I'll just change the test. But for testnet, you could use different block number, and that's how you transition in test network.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But there's, I mean, from a testing perspective, there's no real need, if we're tight for time, to actually have the test cases for ETH 1283.
I mean, the tests are already there, right?
We have to make the tests for not including the EIP into Constantinople.
I think what Martin is saying is that it can be as simple as just disabling the EAP and then generating the tests. So
Yes.
there is no need to actually like test that, you know.
Yeah, I just will update the test instructions.
Yeah, and define a
The actual
new
test
name,
files.
I guess, instead of Constantinople, whatever.
New name. Yeah, well, it could be still Constantinople, I think. I would like to include two different names.
So the problem is that so Constantinople was defined with these feature sets, and if we create a new fork that just disables this, then if we retain the name as Constantinople for mainnet, and at least for Geth we have named forks, which means that for Rinkaby all of a sudden Constantinople name would mean something different. So that's again, you have these clashes that we could hack around somehow, but it gets messy.
So it will stay in Genesis configuration file, like Constantinople 1 and 2.
Well, or ideally Constantinople and something. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions. I don't really care about it.
We could call it Constantinople.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that sounds good. Let's just call it Constantinople.
Ideally, it should be a name that, so on mainnet, it should make sense. So ideally, let's use something meaningful.
There's to be considered how the public sees that a little bit, which they are kind of waiting for the delayed Constantinople fork. So I think it's probably good to keep calling it this way.
I was just going to ask, where did the names Tangerine Whistle and Spurious Dragon come from?
I think Martin came up with those, right? I think we were goofing off, if I recall.
Yeah, I just said some random word.
So what we call it and what goes into the code doesn't necessarily need to line up exactly with what the public refers to it as. So in the case of Spurious Dragon and Tangerine Whistle, they were just called like DOS mitigation hard forks. So just making that point, like we could come up with a creative name, I think, and still call it Constantinople.
Yeah, let's not focus on the naming. I already promised the East Trader community that they can choose future hard fork names to be more inclusive. But let's just go on with this meeting.
Well, that's a good idea. Cool. So I like Peter's idea. Who doesn't like Peter's idea? Okay, let's do Peter's idea.
Yay! Let's call it Peter's fork then.
Yeah, maybe. So are we good there? Does anyone else have any other comments on that or any major objections or anything? Because I think that's a good idea, and it happened on the same block, and we can still do it in a time frame of 6 weeks or whatever. I think we also decided on 6 weeks, right? Was there anyone who thinks we should have more time?
Just actually, can we calculate right now what block number 6 weeks would be? Actually, hold on. What's the block number literally right now?
I'm pulling it up. Well,
7087616.
Okay, so 13,000 and then divide by 5,500. So that number then 100,000 divide.
Wait. We have a difficulty bomb coming up already.
Yeah, I know. We have a difficulty bomb, and I'm just trying to figure out what that would actually look like in practice. And so, like, let's see. 6 weeks is 42 days, and that seems to be very close to what we would get if we put the block number to be 7.3 million. And I feel like going later than 7.3 million would definitely make the block time be too inconvenient for people.
I'll rerun the simulation code and check when that block should arrive with the difficulty bomb factored in.
Okay.
So what's the calculation for Vitalik?
The calculation was just to check what the what the block number would be at at the roughly 6 weeks from now time frame, because right now block times are already increased by about something like 9% from the Ice Age, and so saying 6 weeks would say that we're willing to take 2 more steps of the Ice Age, which would possibly push block times up to maybe 20 to 21 seconds. If we were to be more aggressive and say something like 3 weeks instead, then we could avoid a big step of that. But then,
Yeah, I think 3 weeks is too aggressive.
Even given that people are all expecting it, and that this is, well, I guess if it's not just removing code and we're actually going to be creating an extra hard fork, that it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah, we're having to create new tests, and we're having to do more client coding instead of just removing code.
I think Dimitri said he only needed, if I remember correctly, a week to 2 weeks for testing. 3 might be aggressive. Could we target 4 maybe?
Well, yeah. And presumably we need to deploy Constantinople to 1 or 2 of the test nets before mainnet. So
yeah.
This mini fork needs to be deployed.
Yeah, okay, so I guess either 7.25 million or 7.3 million. I don't know.
Okay, other comments on that? I still like 6 weeks personally, because that sounds like enough time to get Ropsten updated.
No, I'm okay either way.
Okay, anyone very opposed to the 6-week timeline?
Well, just a quick memo about what you said previously. Ropsten is kind of independent of this. So if we go down with this 2-fork approach, then we can update Ropsten and the testnets whenever. So those are completely unlinked from mainnet then.
Okay, got it.
I mean, I'm not saying that we should not update the testnet first and then mainnet, just that it's
separate.
Yeah.
Sure, but this is a hard fork, and the precedent is to update a testnet.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, we can decide the name on chat. We can also decide the block number on chat, because we'll say roughly 6 weeks from now, and try to keep with the block number conventions of, was it triple or quad zeros at the end?
Quad zeros.
Okay. Cool, we'll try to keep
Chatbox wants us to be more aggressive, just to voice the chatbox.
Well, the chatbox is never programmed before then, I guess. Oh, snap.
Except for Taylor in there.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
Okay.
Let's see. So what's... anyone else have any comments before we move on? Okay. So post-mortem, how did this happen? How do we prevent it from happening again? I'd like to bring in Charles St. Louis to talk a little bit about the post-mortem that's being created. Charles is with the Ethereum cat herders, and he was around the entire time the incident was happening this week, so he took some good notes, and the cat herders are kind of working on a post-mortem along with a few other people.
Hudson, we haven't ever shared the cat herders with this group. Do you want to just quickly tell everyone what that is and where it came from?
I almost want it to be a surprise or a secret, but no, yeah, we should explain. And I kind of mentioned this like 3 meetings ago, but we have a group set up now of about maybe 12 people total that go around and help take notes, take surveys for the core devs eventually, do some project management tasks around the ecosystem. Lane, how else would you describe it? You kind of pinned the blog post, so you probably have better wording.
Yeah, I mean, it's an initiative basically to improve project management across the ecosystem and improve like inter-team communication. And so the only thing I would add to what you said, Hudson, is that these are all people with like many years of real world project management experience, which I think is something that we as a community have been somewhat lacking in. And they're volunteering. So yeah, I think we'll see exciting things come out of the initiative.
Yeah, and as part of that, Offrey is going to be kind of hard fork release coordinator, and then taking some of the cat herders and having them help him organize for stuff. So that's part of it. And yeah, so that's pretty much what that is. So Charles, do you want to do, if you have any update on that? I think we basically just have a document, but was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, so there was a document that was just kind of highlighting the decision process for the postponement, kind of walk through what we all chatted about on the Alcor Gitter and on the emergency call. And it's just a document. I could link it in the chat, but mainly the kind of steps were identified. Second, factors involved in deciding to postpone or not, hopping on an emergency red call, then kind of deciding the decision window for aborting the network upgrade, the emergency security testing analysis scanning by chain security, and then proactive and retroactive actions for the postponement, what we can do before it can happen and what we can do after. And then do we feel confident that we can get every stakeholder notified in time? And then we made the decision. It was mostly over the call, if I recall. And then lastly, it was how do we communicate the decisions to everyone? So that being comms, blogs, social, that kind of emergency comms. And then we're at the process where we're deciding to remove the EIP on this call. And then the last one would be rescheduling the hard fork. I'm going to paste the chat in there if you guys want to take note or comment on it.
Yeah, and because it's open edit, don't paste it to YouTube or anywhere else, everybody, because otherwise it'll get vandalized. Okay, so yeah, and if you're interested in contributing to that, Charles is going to paste the link right now. If you're a core dev or someone who is involved in this who wants to help with the post-mortem, feel free to reach out to Charles. Charles, can you put your email in the chat as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. Great. So that's what that is. Does anyone else have comments on a post-mortem, or was anyone else working on one?
I don't have a comment, although I wanted to bring up something that we've discussed after Byzantium. So probably a lot of you remember that we had a similar mess up during Byzantium where we had to do many last-minute hotfix releases due to basically we had the fuzzer, which found a lot of bugs. And the problem there was that I know Parity released 2 or 3 releases. We also did 1 release days or hours before the hard fork. So it was really crazy. And back then we talked about that maybe it would be nice to have an on-chain oracle to pull the plug on a hard fork. And I guess this kind of, it's not really something that people like to talk about because it's obviously a pain point with regard to centralization. That's why I myself never really brought it up because it doesn't really feel too right. But it was brought up again on Reddit, so I thought that it's worthwhile to mention it. That it's not really relevant for the upcoming hard fork, but maybe for the one in October, we could think about how to handle these scenarios where something really bad happens and we need to pull the plug and we don't have 36 hours. We have maybe only 3 hours left. It's I don't know whether this whole on-chain oracle is a good idea or bad idea. From a centralization perspective, it's a bad idea. From a practicality perspective, for grabs. Anyway, I just wanted to bring this up, that it's something that was mentioned quite a lot of times, even previously. So it might be worthwhile to either say that, yes, we want it and this is how we can achieve it without people freaking out, or B, say it that, no, we don't want it and these are the reasons, so that at least next time something goes bad and people ask us why it's not there, we can point them to some rationale.
What if instead of a centralized kill switch, each client maintained their own and made their own decision and coordinated, but they respect only their own kill switch contract?
Well, so that would be even messier, because then you have these client. So in practice, whether clients maintain their own or separate ones, that's not really a difference from a centralization perspective, because it's still one team deciding. And so the original idea was that if you have a contract where every client has, so to say, a vote, and if, I don't know, if we have 3-5 mainnet clients, everyone can vote, and if the majority vote can actually postpone the fork. That is actually the cleanest from the network's perspective, because it doesn't happen then, I don't know, Geth forks and Parity doesn't fork, and then we have a really nasty situation. So go on.
Sorry, I was going to say Parity already has an auto upgrade feature, and obviously it's opt-in. So I don't see any issue with this. If it's, as long as it's an opt-in thing that a node operator can turn on, it doesn't change any of the centralization, decentralization of the network.
I think it's an important goal behind a mechanism like this to kind of state the intent, which would be to make the decision whether or not to go along with a hard fork a conscious decision in the knowledge of some, you know, security flaw exploit like this happened this time around. So, you know, if it was more of a bat signal than an automated switch or something along those lines, something that kind of flashed lights for some people somewhere, that might be a more acceptable mechanism with respect to.
So the problem is that, for example, Geth also had upgrade oracles, where we bumped some numbers in a smart contract, and then Geth started logging messages to the console that there's a new version or something. The issue is that realistically, not many people look at the logs. So it's just a boring set of logs, and you don't get up every morning and see that, oh, did my node log something interesting? And I guess most people run these Ethereum nodes in headless modes on some server. So I don't think many people have a UI on top of it or directly on top of it. So it would be, I don't think it will reach many people if we start messaging.
I guess the clients were implementing a configuration option or whatever that makes it so that the client is still watching that mechanism, but you can opt out of it consciously. I think just the point I'm trying to get across is it's not really a centralization mechanism if there's some conscious decision on the part of the person running the node to go along with it.
No, so I agree that that would be the best scenario. For example, if the client would signal to the user that, hey, there's this decision, do you want to opt out? That would be a real nice thing to do. Just I don't really see that viable. For example, if Infura has 45 nodes, and then how do those 45 nodes signal that, hey, I would like to opt out? So it's from that perspective, it's a bit messy. But yeah, anyway, I don't want to hijack this discussion. The reason I wanted to bring it up is specifically because it's not a simple task to solve. And if we can solve it well, then I think it would be a welcome thing from the community. If we can't solve it well, then it will be just a horrible idea. So it's long-term, it's probably something to discuss.
Sure. The last thing I'll say about it, just to clarify what I was trying to say, is just that the opt-in, opt-out decision would be kind of like an ahead of time thing. So me, I'm thinking 99.999% scenarios, I'm going to opt into what this group's consensus is if I'm running a node. So I'd be happy to flip that flag in my configuration ahead of time, and then in an exceptional case, be willing to flip it back around the time when there's a hard fork. So it kind of puts the diligence on me. Like I have to be diligent. So the degree to which I care about being decentralized is I think well managed in that scenario.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I also agree on that. That if it is something opt-in, I can imagine that many people would prefer to opt in rather than to have to watch their computers and install updates at the last moment.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, we should definitely be kind of iterating on those ideas a little bit.
Hudson, I just reran the simulation with the latest numbers. Can we just very quickly go back to block number
sure.
and block time again? Cool. So with all the latest numbers, including the current hash rate, it looks like we hit 30-second blocks at the end of April, April 27, which is between April 17 and 27. So that's kind of what I said earlier. So that's good. And then we talked about 6 weeks from now. Vitalik suggested blocks 7.25 or 7.3 million. 7.25 million looks like it would happen on February 19, and 7.3 million looks like March 2nd. So if we want 6 weeks from now, today is January 18, we want the end of February. So that puts us around 7.3 million. That is what Vitalik said. So that's
March 2nd seems like it's a bit more than 6 weeks, so we could always do something in the middle, like 7.29 or 7.28 or whatever.
Yeah, that puts us at, based on the simulation, February 26 or 28.
Okay, let's do 27 because it's a Wednesday.
Okay, cool. So we've narrowed it down to like a day. I'll figure out the block number. Sounds good. It's going to be a little harder to pick a specific day given the bomb, because as the network hash rate changes, the speed of the bomb changes, but we'll do our best.
Well, yeah, but I guess that's the kind of the point of picking Wednesday, so that even if you have a 2-day drift, it's still in the middle of the, or I mean, it's still on work day.
Cool. All right, sounds good.
Great. Is there anything else that we have left to talk about with regards to the Constantinople upgrade? Again, we're going to be naming the second one in the core dev chat, and then, or where I think Afri mentioned maybe EthTrader deciding. I kind of like that idea personally. And then, what else was I going to say? Oh, Afri, for you and for your planning of the roadmap and stuff like that, were there any other questions you had or things you wanted to say?
For Constantinople, or what do you mean?
For Constantinople specifically.
No.
Okay, sounds good. The next item is ProgPoW, and we actually have, I think we have if, def, and else in here. So that's really awesome. Before we go into whether or not we are doing a ProgPoW hard fork, we tentatively decided that, was it last meeting? Last meeting feels like forever ago. I think we decided it last meeting, but since then there's been some community feedback about it, so I wanted to make sure that if Def and Else were able to respond to that community feedback, if they had any updates or commentary, and then also just rediscuss ProgPoW within the group. So welcome if Def and Else, and feel free to start out with any commentary or updates you have.
So in the past 2 weeks since, you guys can hear me, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So in the last 2 weeks since it was tentatively decided to go ahead, obviously there's been a lot of community feedback and also a lot more testing. The Gangnam testnet has quite a few clients on it now that's getting some pretty good hash rates. One interesting development that came up was we've discovered what appears to be an AMD compiler bug. So every once in a while, as we generate these random programs, the AMD compiler just completely miscompiles it. And so AMD hardware will give bogus answers for an entire period. The next period, when you get a new random program, it compiles it correctly. We're actively engaged, both our team and also some of the ETH miner developers, with some AMD engineers trying to root cause this and see how we can mitigate this issue to go ahead. Some other feedback that we've gotten is that there's a number of parameters that tune ProgPoW, how much compute, how much memory it uses. And the tunings that we set turned out to be a little bit too harsh for AMD, a little bit too compute heavy for some AMD hardware. So we have a recommendation to tune it down a little bit, remove about 10% of the compute workload. That has no effect on some AMD hardware. It has no effect on any of the NVIDIA hardware we've tried, but it does help some of the AMD hardware that's out there in the ecosystem to keep the playing field fairly level. I think that's the only major updates we have.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments or questions outside of if def else for them or about this?
What's the preferred channel to give these feedback? Is it the Discord? Is there some other GitHub we should be talking to? What's the preferred?
The East Miner dev channel has turned into a somewhat unofficial channel. We could also start our own Gitter channel. Actually, that's probably the best. We'll start our own Gitter channel.
And what's the authoritative specification location? Because there's one on EIP, there's one on if def else. The test case on the one on if def else is actually out of date.
The test case on if def else should be up to date.
Unless you change it in the last 3 days, it's not.
Oh, I will make sure that we get that fixed.
So I have many questions like this. So a Gitter or a formal channel would be something that I would be very interested in.
Yeah, let's say a Gitter for if def else. That will be the best place. I'll start that right now.
Wonderful. Any other comments, questions, stuff like that? I think the biggest community feedback that I've been seeing lately is that that this decision was potentially rushed a little bit, not enough time given for discussion. But even the bigger argument than that was that AMD's video cards are affected. So I'm glad that y'all are looking into that and fixing it with AMD, and yeah, good work there. But yeah, I don't think does anyone have any proposals to change the decision? It was tentative, so we still can, but as of right now, we're still going ahead with an eventual ProgPoW hard fork. Yeah, anybody have comments or anything?
Yeah, I have some comments.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, I'll just go ahead. So there's been some discussion about, ProgPoW claims certain features, such as a certain level of let's call it ASIC resistance, and question if it upholds those claims, which is very technical discussion. But then there's the other discussion, because these claims or features, the ASIC resistance, relies on the kind of assumption that we don't want ASICs on the network, and that a level of ASIC resistance is something worth striving for. I personally kind of assume that naturally that's what we should aim for, because that's what one of the early goals with Ethash. But it appears that there's been it appears that this is not a technical issue, it's more of a political issue, and there's been a lot of discussions about this. Should we strive for ASIC resistance, and if we should, how much pains are we willing to go through, and is ProgPoW the right way to reach that? I believe so, but yeah, I'm willing to hear other viewpoints on this.
Can I jump in? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I'm coming from the perspective that we eventually want to end up off of proof of work entirely. And that's one of the motivations for developing this.
Could you get a little closer to your microphone, Mr. Def?
Yeah, I'm coming from the perspective that we eventually want to move off of proof of work entirely. Sorry, with the understanding, and I'm trying to support that decision. If that's not the direction that we're going in, I think some of this discussion becomes less interesting. Assuming that we're trying to move to a system that we're not going to be doing proof of work, I think the most empirically stable system has been the status quo that Ethereum has been running on. You can observe from the last 2 weeks after the initial announcement of a tentative consideration for the progressive proof of work, what it motivates those possessing hardware on either side, on either the existing status quo with GPU mining, or with those who are making or have made ASICs, how that motivates the conversation to kind of take non-productive angles, if you will. I think that's just the exact type of negativity that we're trying to avoid eventually. I think the problem that we would like to try to help with is to minimize the economic incentive alignment of particular hardware holders or of any particular hardware ecosystem to the development of the network as a whole. I think it's super important to preserve the independence and the ability for Ethereum core developers to continue making progress in technology and enhancements to the network. And it's very unfortunate if the network hash and the network security model becomes aligned to a particular type of system or particular specific set of owners or miners or something like that. Now, that said, I mean, even there are even problems with the status quo, right? I think it's been correctly remarked that AMD and NVIDIA, and there are not enough particular independent brands or makers of the existing GPU ASICs for the network, and thus may have some economic alignment issues there. I think that's a valid argument to make. But taking that same line of reasoning, I think the existing status quo also already has the best, least evil, if you will, because it is the most distributed hardware compared to any other ASIC that's available, or even FPGAs or what have you, right? In terms of the economies of scale that people have pointed out in the ASIC economy, in the terms of the distribution and the economy of scale being aligned to a wide and massive distribution base and a very good availability in terms of fairness of availability, fairness of distribution, fairness of market price. The status quo already has the least evil of all the evils. And so that was kind of the starting point for our development and our rationale for working on this. Beyond that, I don't think the goal is to necessarily try to win for one particular hardware or another, because I don't think necessarily that hardware, any particular hardware maker or owner should necessarily win in the end. But I can understand that might be very unpopular, a very unpopular or very negative thing for existing miners and existing hardware ecosystems. I just very much hope that we can contribute a little bit to the continued independence of Ethereum development.
Okay, thanks for that. Does anyone else have comments, questions?
I have a kind of more of a statement than the question, the comment, is that I would like, I mean, I don't know how people perceive these meetings in terms of making the decisions, but I would like to say that I'm abstaining from making a decision, and so my silence should not be counted as I for or against something, because I personally believe that this particular call is not the right place to make this decision in the end. And I would just explain my perspective is that I'm not aligned with any of the kind of ASIC or not ASIC sides, as some people might have suggested, because of my activity in terms of discussing it. My only sort of point of view is that I've taken on the task of kind of developing and sort of designing one of the parts of the Ethereum 1.x, which is the state rent. And I do understand that the more hard forks we do have planned, the harder it is going to be for us, or to me personally, to do this job that I've taken on. So that's my main viewpoint. And therefore, that explains my sort of interest in the issue. Otherwise, I'm not really interested in kind of arguing with miners or with ASIC manufacturers or whoever that be. And I also wanted to point something out, is that although some people say, you know, if you don't like the hard fork, you just fork off and then you do your own fork. I would also say that this is not the correct advice, because it actually depends on the entities that fund the further development. Let's say that whoever does the fork, you know, the Ethereum Foundation, for example, possesses the Ether on both sides of the fork, and whatever they choose to do with that, then it's actually determines the chances of any of the forks winning. So that's why I think that's why people kind of appealing to this forum for particular for a decision, because everybody know it's not formalized, but people informally know this is why we're actually making these decisions here. So that's it for me.
I'd like to jump in and also back that up. I, in principle, also agree with less forks. Just an observation, I think more forks is not just hard for developers, but it causes discussion and it causes churn anyway. So to the extent that there's many much earlier thread saying that if a proof of stake could just be implemented in the short term, we should go directly to that, and I wholly agree. I mean, there's if basically progressive proof of work is only going to be in effect for a month or two before everything else is ready, then there's kind of no point, and an extra fork is not a good thing. That said, if the development team of the folks meeting here believe that there is a longer or more arbitrary amount of time needed to get proof of stake working correctly, then I think one of the mechanisms that is built into progressive proof of work is, in effect, it's basically a bunch of microscopic forks that are not hard forks, right? It's actually the evolution of the algorithm, or the changing of the random math and the recompilation is basically changing the mining algorithm in, well, currently a 50 block step, but maybe we change it to a shorter time. What people do to do ASIC resisted forks, I mean, that is the mechanism that underlies the core of progressive proof of work. So it helps eliminate the need for at least algorithmic forking for the algorithm or the mining algorithm. So it maintains a base, and then you're just doing a bunch of continuous forks all the time in a predictable and well understood manner. Yeah.
And actually, with regards to that, the next thing, if we have time, was probably going to be the POS finality gadget on the POW chain. But Danny or Vitalik, do y'all have any kind of words on how fast things are coming along? Not like necessarily like, oh, it's going to happen on this date, but anything like that?
So I think one thing that's relevant here is that we're designing the protocol so that the beacon chain will be kind of usable as a finality gadget for the proof of work chain if people wants to. So that would basically give the same security properties that the original kind of pre-beacon chain hybrid Casper FFG was going to give. And that's something that will be out and not focusing on timelines before sharding and before state execution stuff. So that would basically mean that if that happens, that if everyone is kind of listening to the proof of stake system for finality, and if enough people are participating that it's actually secure, then a 51% attack on the proof of work will basically be able to censor, but it will not be able to revert anything finalized.
Okay.
Realistically, we're not talking about a 6-month timeline.
Yeah, no, I don't. Realistically, I don't expect this within 6 months.
And adding the finality gadget from the beacon chain is probably not. It wouldn't happen at the initial launch. We'd want to see stability on the beacon chain and kind of an increased security over there before we.
Well, it would be part of the beacon chain code immediately. It's just no one would necessarily listen to it immediately.
Correct, but the follow distance at the beginning would also be really long, and we would want to choose to reduce the follow distance.
Yeah, that's true.
Vitalik, I'd like to ask your opinion in terms of the censor and not reversal comment. If you have a persistent censorship for some percentage of the blocks being censoring a certain type of operation, would the chain have to basically be less effective at that point and cause basically a crisis anyway if there's a censorship?
If there is a censorship 51% attack, and if the attacker is persistent, so the attacker doesn't just go away on their own after like 1 or 2 days or whatever, then basically the only thing that we can really do is, well, if we know the attacker has ASICs, then we can change the proof work algorithm to cancel their ASICs. But if it's a 51% attack that's run based on basically GPU hardware, then we would really have no choice but to kind of scramble as quickly as possible to migrate to some kind of proof of stake.
Or just change the algorithm entirely.
Well, no, but the point is that if the attacker's using GPUs, then we...
there's another avenue, actually. So I've been thinking about it and researching the ways to avoid this kind of situations, regardless of what kind of miners we have, like ASIC, non-ASIC. So, and I thought about, so there was a proposal on the BTC Reddit from this guy who runs the mining farm in the US. So he essentially proposes to modify the fork choice rule in that case in Bitcoin Cash, but in our case could be in Ethereum 1.0, so that in the long term it converges to the same fork choice rule, but in a short term it could favor the blocks which are not censoring, for example, or the blocks which are not trying to revert. So essentially, even if the attacker has ASICs, and so it would still be beatable if the network agrees that actually, yeah, that attacker is actually censoring, because they can compare the transaction pool with the blocks, and they can figure out whether the censorship is really going on.
So that works. That works okay if your goal is to prevent short-term 51%, short-range 51% attacks. But if you try to use like if you try to turn kind of banning censorship into a fork choice rule component, then that starts to become scary, because an attacker can do a kind of network splitting attacks where they can kind of censor just enough so that half the network thinks it's fine, half the network thinks it's not fine. And at that point, the attacker can just start wreaking a huge amount of havoc. And so I would probably recommend kind of not trying to go in that direction. At least, like, the only version of that sort of thing that I would find secure is probably something based on combining my the 99% fault tolerant consensus approach, which requires basically clients and like all the nodes in the network to be online with proof of work in some way, which could be possible, but like properly researching and specking it out would take a huge amount of time.
So I want to jump back to an earlier point about GPU versus ASIC 51% attack. Ethereum currently is resistant by the virtue of it being the biggest coin, biggest work consumer on the GPU type of ASIC, right? In any case, in any sort of hardware specific algorithm, or an algorithm, more correctly said, an algorithm that can be made optimized for a specific type of hardware. Only the biggest work consumer that consumes the most amount of that hardware is ever protected. So by changing the algorithm to some other algorithm, whatever hardware affinity it has, that algorithm selection would only be protected from a 51% attack if the algorithm selected was the biggest work consumer on that type of new type of hardware. And if you fork to a new an algorithm that requires a new hardware to be made, well, first of all, that algorithm initially would probably most likely be best mined on either something programmable, right? Either CPU or GPU or something like that. Perhaps FPGAs, but so it would still be, attackable. If it was originally attackable, it would be still attackable on unprogrammable hardware. If it was forking to some sort of optimized ASIC algorithm, then you immediately run into a distribution problem where the first to produce gains economies of scale and gains leverage, and also limits. You run into a limited abilities. Scaling hardware is always hard, right? It's not like software. You can send it all around the world, and any piece of hardware that can run that software immediately gets it, right? Distributing hardware means shipping something somewhere, and some manufacturing line spinning up. So there's always going to be a narrowing, or basically you end up putting yourself on a narrow bridge, or a narrow path that becomes very dangerous all of a sudden.
Sure, yeah.
Well, just food for thought. If Ethereum ever would switch over to some ASIC-friendly proof-of-work algorithm, then, for example, an elegant solution would be to announce that, hey, 1 year from now or 2 years from now, we're going to use this ASIC-friendly algorithm, and that kind of gives everybody ample time to sort these problems out.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about that a little bit. I think another person in the community has already talked about proofs of scale, economies of scale. And I think that's a very important point that we all understand. So first of all, there is economy of scale, and then the same person referred to manipulation in terms of partnerships in hardware manufacturing in China. And both of these are very, very real. So economies of scale, obvious term, first in means you have the advantage and you can leverage additional profits from the initial sale, whoever's most efficient, to basically have a pricing advantage and a manufacturing advantage for whatever initial partnerships they've started. First mover advantage, I mean, everyone should be familiar with that. And in terms of production in the Asian ecosystem, once you've established a money-making path, these relationships become very well cemented. So equal technology, even if people have an equally efficient, two competitors have an equally efficient ASIC, the natural evolution of the production economy is that you have one dominant producer, a second competitor, and everyone else being terribly far behind. Study any sort of stable production ecosystem. I mean, look at beer, look at paper, look at any physical good. Look at it's very obvious that the consolidation happens very early on, and especially for narrow things with narrow demand and very specific purpose, special purpose demand, then you end up with very tight alignment of economic incentives to preserve one particular path. Furthermore, you have manufacturers that end up saying there's been an argument that says, well, it's either bad where you have too much complexity and only people that are well funded can make progress, or too little complexity where, well, only economies of scale dominates. Well, actually, it's not either or. Both of them will be true, right? You're always going to have someone who has a technological advantage either in the ability to optimize for complexity or a technological advantage in being able to drive either to a lower process node faster or an economy of scale advantage. It's always going to be the case that there's, in a hardware ecosystem, you can't pick your poison. All three of them are poison. So
we're having to wrap up the call here in just a minute or two, but feel free to just wrap up your final thought there.
Okay, so that's why I'm more pushing for the status quo. If you have an ecosystem that you already know is distributed, it's the enemy you know, and it's already stabilized in kind of trading off all of the benefits, or sorry, dealing with all these damages or difficulties of a hardware ecosystem, and ameliorating that because those incentives aren't aligned to trying to manipulate the Ethereum chain, right? They're already aligned to going to win a different market.
Cool. Thanks for your comment there. So something that I just want to bring up before we sign off. Alexi mentioned earlier that this isn't the right form for, or this is a bad form for a decision for ProgPoW, and I actually agree with that. I don't know of a better form, but that is something that the cat herders said they want to try to look at and just evaluate and see if there's a better form or decision-making process for that. If anyone else has ideas, feel free to shoot them in the All Core Devs chat, because that'll be very helpful. And something else that was brought up was that the people who aren't commenting on the call about the ProgPoW decision or tentative decision is because they haven't formed an opinion yet, or it's kind of out of their wheelhouse as far as this hardware stuff goes. So I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. I would say that we will need to continue this discussion in the future. I don't know if it'll fit into the next Core Dev call or not. We'll try, but I do want to thank IfDef and else for coming on and providing their perspective and answering questions and things like that. Do we have any final comments to just wrap things up? We're a little bit over time, but if anyone had anything they really wanted to say.
I'm sorry, Hudson. I'm jumping a bit back in our agenda right now. Wouldn't it be nice if we can agree on a block number for Constantinople today?
Yeah, and Lane actually put in the All Core Dev chat some numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm proposing 7.28 million. The simulation changes slightly depending on like two variables, which are the network hash power, right, which could change between now and then, as well as the current block time. but we did some sensitivity analysis, and it looks like 7.28 million gets us pretty close to the target. And as someone else proposed, I think we can maybe go with that if people are okay with it for now as a tentative number, and then once all the clients are updated, reevaluate in like 2 weeks or something.
But why not finally do the thing that was suggested a long time ago and base the fork off of the block timestamp? Because now that would be even more helpful.
I can tell you, because it is quite an involved change in the clients, and this is nothing we can probably do within a couple of weeks.
And there are also some really weird corner cases where an uncle block mined after the fork could actually. So you have the problem with that post-fork blocks might have some weird uncle blocks with weird timestamps. So validation gets really, really messy.
Okay.
I'm good with the block that Lane just suggested. Anybody else? Anybody opposed?
Can we also figure out the block for Upstand then? Maybe a couple weeks before that? It would probably help not to delay 2 more weeks. I mean, picking the block.
Yeah, let's do that on the core dev chat, unless you have numbers ready or a suggestion.
Nope.
Okay, great. Well, we're definitely over time, so I want to make sure we respect everyone's time and wrap this up. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to all of you in about... Oh, actually, are we talking in 2 weeks, or is there going to be that in-person thing? When is that? Oh, it's just the 1st. Okay, never mind, we're good. Okay, thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Hi.